Evening, everyone. My name is Filip Hristic, and I'm the proud principal of Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. It is my pleasure to welcome you all this evening for a very special opportunity to hear from Dan Duster. Before I introduce Dan, I want to thank a few people who made this event possible. Thank you, Jamie Raposky, co-chair of the Ida B. Wells High School Community Equity Council, Holly Pruitt, community organizer, volunteer, and neighborhood ally, Cassie Lanzas, Ida B. Wells multimedia specialist, Vice Principal Aisha Conning, Terry Proctor from PPS Multimedia, and Jackie Haddon, Maplewood Elementary School PTA co-president. I want to give a special shout out to all the 8 PTAs who, along with school librarians, have created the Southwest Community Reads Project to help ensure that all students have access to age-appropriate materials about Ida B. Wells. More than 200 books were purchased from Third Eye Books, a local Black-owned bookstore. Our 2 local public library branches also came on board to support our younger readers. The goal of the Ida B. Wells PTAs is to ensure that all of our libraries are stocked with materials to educate and enlighten our community about our amazing namesake. Thank you to all of you who are taking part in this amazing initiative. I also want to give a big thank you to the members of the Ida B. Wells High School Renaming Committee, whose courage, tenacity, and wisdom helped usher a historic change without which we would not be assembled here this evening. With undivided support from our superintendent and PPS board directors, our school now carries the name of someone who helped change the course of American history, someone who used the power of her pen and her voice in the light of truth on injustice, and someone whose life and legacy ought to inspire us both today and for generations to come. And with that privilege, our school now carries the name of a great one. And with that privilege comes a great responsibility. Ida B. Wells, as I'm sure many of you know, had great expectations of the leaders and her community during her life. She was not afraid to speak her truth and to hold people responsible for being their best. We have a lot of work to do to become the kind of school and community that all of us can be proud of and that Ida B. Wells would be proud of too. And I know that I speak for many of us when I say that we welcome this important challenge. We're here this evening to hear from someone who can help us in our quest to learn more about Ida B. Wells. Dan Duster is Ida B. Wells' great-grandson, and he serves on the board of the Ida B. Wells Memorial Foundation. He's an author, a coach, and a motivational speaker. I first spoke to Dan back in January before we asked the school board to approve our name change. He was gracious then and has been supportive of our work ever since. Dan, thank you for being with us this evening.
All right. Well, good evening, good evening, good evening. It's absolutely an honor, a privilege to be part of this celebration, this historic moment of renaming the school to Ida B. Wells. So Principal Erstick, you've been outstanding at fighting for that and keeping me and the family involved. So thank you, and thank you for the other people who've worked hard to make this happen. We thoroughly appreciate it. As you said, Ida B. Wells, so my name is Dan Duster, and Ida B. Wells is my great-grandmother. That is my father's mother's mother. So Ida B. Wells, just getting it out of the way, Ida B. Wells had 4 children, and the youngest one was Alfreda. Alfreda had a total of 5 children, the middle one being Donald. Donald had 3 children, that's Michelle, David, and Daniel. So that is the lineage. So what I like to do is just talk about Ida B. Wells and what she did, some of the highlights, talk about the school, the opportunity, the inspiration that's given me, and then open it up for questions and answers. So Ida B. Wells was born into slavery. She was actually born in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi. That's about 30 miles south of Memphis, Tennessee. So both of her parents were slaves. Her mom was a slave from Virginia that got sold off into slavery, which her mom telling Ida about the story of being sold into slavery and never seeing her siblings again had a big impact on her mom and subsequently on Ida. Her father was a carpenter, was actually the product of the slave master going into the slave quarters. So her father, Jim Wells, was a mulatto. And they lived, so after slavery ended in 1865, and Ida was the oldest of a total of 8 children. One died shortly after childbirth. But the parents sent the children to school. Mom went to school with them until she could read and write, and was devout Catholic, carried a Bible all the time. And again, made sure that Ida could read and write. And her father was active in the community and in politics. And so her father, as Ida could read and write, would read to, groups of people. So that, again, you didn't have all the media outlets or entertainment outlets that we have today. So one of the entertainment and information outlets was people gathering in groups and reading the newspaper, talking about local events. And so Ida would do that. So she had a lot of things that she did because of her family and because of her passion that positioned her and prepared her to be the leader that she was. So that was one of them. Another thing was, again, Jim was a carpenter, Lizzie was a cook, and they lived on the plantation of the slave owner, as most slaves did after slavery. It's like you didn't have anywhere to go. So Jim, being active in politics, said he was going to vote. The slave owner, plantation owner, said, "Hey, if you vote, I'm kicking you off of this land." And Jim was like, "You got to do what you got to do." He voted. The plantation owner held his word and kicked him off the land. And Ida saw that and was like, "Wow, that's really messed up. Like, okay, you get kicked out of your house for voting? What an injustice." And so that affected her. Ida was ahead of her years as far as responsibility. She, in 1878, at the age of 16, yellow fever went throughout the South and killed, just like what happened with this plague, killed tens of thousands of people, ended up killing both of her parents and one of her other siblings. And so the rest of the family, extended family, was like, okay, well, we'll divide up the family. Ida can kind of take care of herself, but this child will go there, this child will go there, and divide the family in 3 or 4 households. And Ida was like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have my family divided. And they're like, yeah, like, go ahead, sit down. You're 16. We're going to handle this. And folklore has it that there was a shotgun on the mantle, and she got the shotgun and was like, look, I'm going to take care of my family. And they're like, okay, why didn't you say so? We're happy to have you do that. So Ida, at the age of 16, decided to take care of her 5 younger siblings. I'm 52. And if you tell me I got to take care of 5 kids right now, I'm going to be like, oh, I need help. So I thoroughly admire her courage to do that. So she got a job because she was educated. She got a job as a school teacher and would commute, go teach during the week and then come back on the weekends. And of course, she had support. The family had support to take care of the family. But the most important thing is they stayed together as a unit. And it was because of her being vehement about doing that happened. Other things that happened that are, I think, very significant. Again, America tries to encapsulate the civil rights movement from 1854, saying that, the bus boycott in Rosa Parks, and God bless Rosa for doing it, until 1968. And it actually goes way, way further back, and it still continues right now. So 1884, Ida was thrown off of a train for the same thing, not giving up her seat. And so they had the state laws back then. And so prior to that, she'd been able to ride in a first class car because legally you could do that. And then you had the Jim Crow laws that were starting to be instilled. And they said that blacks would have to sit in the smoking car. And so Ida was an elegant woman, as you can see in the background. She was a petite woman as well, like 5 foot, maybe 5'1", maybe 105 pounds, and dressed elegantly. And so she was on a rail car, and the conductor was like, "Hey, look, you need to give up your seat and you can go to the smoking car." And she's like, "Well, no, I bought a first class ticket here, so I'm going to stay right here." So the conductor put his hands on her to get her to move, and she bit him, allegedly drawing blood. And so he's like, "Okay," and went back for backup. It took 3 men to forcibly remove her from the train. And she fought. I mean, literally, clothes torn, scratches, bruises. And when she was thrown off of the rail car, the other passengers cheered. And that, I mean, she was already embarrassed and angry and frustrated, but that really sent her off the top. And so she sued the railroad. Black woman in 1884 sued the railroad and won, which is tremendous. The unfortunate part is it took a few years to go to the Supreme Court of Tennessee, and they ultimately reversed the decision. And so instead of winning $500, she was assessed $200 in court costs. So another thing that fueled her fire for passion and things against injustice. So she moved to Memphis, Tennessee. Again, was living in Holly Springs, moved to Memphis, lived there for a few years, was a school teacher, and also wrote, because she was passionate about reading and writing. So she wrote some freelance articles and wrote an article about the disparity in the school systems between the white school system and the black school system. And the white school system had adequate resources, proper schools, proper class size, and proper funding. The black school system was overcrowded, underfunded, and under-resourced. Which unfortunately, you can read that article today, and it really still applies to a lot of school systems today. So they did not fire her, but the next semester they didn't renew her contract. So that forced her to get a different job. So that really forced her into journalism. So she's like, "Okay, well, I can write, enjoy writing." And Ida was both a negotiator and an entrepreneur, which we really don't think about her, think of her being that, but she was. So she went to the owner of the newspaper there, which was the Memphis Free Speech, and negotiated and became part owner, and wrote the articles and became, one of the most popular journalists, not only in Memphis, but really in America. Because again, the newspaper was the only form of communication. There was no YouTube, there was no internet, there was no television. So the newspaper was it. And so she became popular as Iola, not Ida B. Wells. And so she did that for a few years. And then she had 3 friends. So she's known as a crusader against lynching. So the big incident that happened there was she had 3 friends: Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, Will Stewart, who were part of business owners of the People's Grocery, which is a cooperative. Probably about a dozen people were part owners. A racist white store owner who had another grocery store across the way from the People's Grocery intentionally instigated an incident, and won't go into details. But bottom line, the store owners, black store owners, felt threatened, so they took up arms, were attacked by the white store owners and some other white men in the town. 2 white men ended up being shot, and the townspeople rounded up as many of the black men as they could, threw them all in jail. There was a black militia that used to protect blacks in the South during that time frame, during the Reconstruction area. So black militia protected them for a few days after it was found out that the men who got shot were going to survive. They left, and then that night, the other racist white men in the town went and got those 3 men in particular: Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, Will Stewart, took them out to a place called the Curve that's in Memphis. I've been there a couple of times. Last time I've been has been probably 12 years, and it still has an eerie, cold, macabre feeling to it. There's still no development in that area. It just feels barren and cold. But they took them out there and beat them and tortured them and lynched them, murdered them. And Thomas Moss was one of Ida B. Wells' best friends. Ida B. Wells was godmother to Thomas Moss's child. And so she knew he was an upstanding man. And Thomas allegedly said, hey, look, don't kill me. I've got a baby. I've got a pregnant wife at home. And they killed him anyway, along with the other two. And their last words were, hey, look, tell my people to go west. There is no justice for them here. And so Ida was not there when it happened, but she got back and she, did some investigative journalism. So that was the beginning of her becoming an investigative journalist. And that was kind of America's first investigative journalist. Usually if things happened, things were written, it wasn't investigated. If you saw it in print, you pretty much believed that it happened. And so Ida reading what happened, it was pretty much they were killed for conspiracy. They were lynched allegedly pretty much for conspiracy to kill white people. And Ida was like, no, these are my boys. These are actually good, upstanding men in the community. I know them. And she was like, wait a minute. Now, if they're being accused of this, I know they're great people. What about all these other people that have been lynched? And so she did a couple of things that were just, to me, beyond her time. So the investigation of that was phenomenal. She also initiated a boycott of the rail car. Is that Ida always made things bigger than herself. So instead of fighting a person, she tried to fight the system. And so she initiated a boycott that was successful in Memphis for several months. And allegedly, the owner of the rail car was like, hey, look, please stop this boycott. It's really hurting us. And she's like, okay. And then went back to the people, was like, keep boycotting, it's working. She also did travel west herself to Arkansas. And that was part of the first migration of Black people towards the west or the north. And was responsible literally for 6,000 plus people moving from Memphis to Arkansas, which was roughly probably 10% of the population at that time. So that's significant that she was able to have that type of both courage and influence to do that. Again, she also started to investigate other lynchings, and then she traveled to Europe to enlighten the people in Europe as to what was happening in America, and to embarrass and shame America, in that America's founded on life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom, and justice for all. And so she took pictures for lynchings. They would have pictures of the lynching, and it was barbaric to say the least. But they would have pictures just like a sporting event where you catch a marlin or a bear and like, hey, look what I caught here. That's what people would have with lynchings. And it would be sometimes spontaneous, sometimes a planned event where it's like, hey, you get a discount on the rail car if you go into this lynching. So again, just recognize that America has had a very barbaric history, and we need to recognize that. And if we can have dialogue about how bad things were, we can have a better appreciation for how things are, and still an accountability for how things need to be. But we absolutely need to recognize that. And so Ida in Europe, when she went to England and Scotland to talk about that and try to affect the people that were influencers there and initiate a boycott. Again, America was the largest exporter of cotton. Britain, England, and Scotland. So Britain comprised of England and Scotland, especially those two, were the largest importer of cotton. So she was like, hey, let's do a boycott. And so it was effective. And she learned a lot of other things being over there they had a women's suffrage movement in England as well. A lot of clubs that she learned how to organize, and brought that information, that knowledge back to the US to make an impact here. And so in Memphis, while there had been 200 plus lynchings in the years before, after traveling to Europe, it was 20 plus years before there was a lynching in Memphis. And so I'd say that she had a direct impact on that. She also investigated over 200 lynchings that had occurred in the South. And again, was the investigative journalist, literally traveled and interviewed people. And especially where there were accusations of rape, oftentimes there was no sex. It just didn't happen. A woman made a false accusation, or somebody else made a false accusation, and then the Black man was lynched. And so she published that, along with that in some cases, if there were sex, it was consensual. And so, 1892, that didn't go over well, that, hey, there was consensual sex, and the racist townspeople in Memphis went and destroyed her newspaper. And our family, she didn't put it in her journal, but our family has interpreted that she was intentional about being out of town when that happened. She was at a convention in Philadelphia when that happened. So she never returned. She didn't return back to Memphis. Ended up going to New York, working with a person by the name of T. Thomas Fortune, who had a newspaper, and spent some time there, and then came to Chicago for the World's Fair in 1893, which was called the Columbian Exposition. And she was counterparts with Frederick Douglass. And Ida's, so also to tell you about Ida, and a lot of times we think about the civil rights movement, that people were on the same page. And talking to people who experienced the 60s civil rights movement, was like, no, we were on the same page. We disagreed. Malcolm versus Martin, the Black Panthers versus Operation Push versus, a lot of other, conflicting people who wanted the same outcome, but they were going about it in different ways. And Ida and Frederick were similar in that Ida's philosophy was, or I guess Frederick's philosophy was, hey, look, if you owe me a loaf of bread and you give me half a loaf, that's progress. And, we appreciate that. Ida's philosophy was, if you owe me a loaf of bread and you give me half a loaf, I need my other half loaf. I want what I'm entitled to. I don't want progress. And so I think for any civil rights movement, you need both, to appreciate progress and to demand equality. And so there were no Black people, no Negroes that participated in the Columbian Exposition. And Ida wanted to boycott. She's like, no, that's unacceptable. And Frederick was like, no, don't boycott. Let's, go and participate and try and highlight what we're doing. So again, at odds with that, but she was able to produce a number of pamphlets at her own expense and to highlight why the Negro was not part of the Columbian Exposition. And so she met Ferdinand Barnett during that process. And Ferdinand was a phenomenal guy as well, very underrated in American history. He was a civil rights attorney in Chicago, prominent civil rights attorney. He was a widower. He liked strong Black women. He had married a woman who was a Michigan graduate, and they had 2 children together. And then unfortunately she passed. And Ferdinand was adamant about finding another strong Black woman. So when he met Ida, he was like, yeah, you're the one. We got to get married. So he supposedly pursued her for quite a while before she decided to marry him. And both of them were a little older at that time for getting married. Again, Ida was born in 1862, got married in 1894. So kind of late, had her first child. And that caused controversy as well, is that Ida was part of the women's suffrage movement. And excuse me, I just had hip replacement surgery 2 days ago. And so if you see me wince, that's because I'm in pain. So I'm getting through it here. But yeah, Ida being part of the women's suffrage movement was, at the same time trying to partner with, but at odds with Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They felt, so people in the suffrage movement felt, hey, you can't be married and be part of the suffrage movement, because marriage at the time, again, the wife was considered somewhat subservient. And so it's like, you can't advocate for women's rights and be married, and let alone have children. I was like, yeah, I can, I will, and I'm doing it. And so, again, just at odds with different people during that time frame. And so Ida and Ferdinand had a total of 4 children, which I told you the lineage there. And I'll give you a little insight if I'm talking a little faster than normal because there's so much I want to say. But yeah, so had 4 children, Charles Aiken, Herman Cossack, Barnett, Ida Jr., which again, another Idaism. Most women didn't have to have juniors at the time. And then Alfreda. And she had Alfreda when she was almost 42 years old, which was old for back then. A lot of people do it now, but she got married late, and having a child that late was uncommon. And once again, I thank God that Ida was uncommon, because if not, I wouldn't be here. So she did a few other phenomenal things. Met with, again, being an advocate against lynching, she met with President William McKinley twice, 1898. Again, a Black woman in 1898 meeting with the president to talk about lynching and the need to make it a federal crime. And he didn't, but the fact that she met with him is phenomenal. And the side note on that is, for something to become a law, it needs to go through the House and then go through the Senate, or vice versa. So I went to the US Senate, issued an apology to the US in 2005 for never passing any anti-lynching legislation. So 3 times it went through the House and they approved a bill and made it to the Senate, and the Senate did not approve it. Significance of that, you say, what's the big deal about having lynching being a federal crime? Federal crime, you get federal resources. Local crime, you get local resources. So lynching is murder, so murder is murder, right? No, not when it comes to an investigation. Is that I'm the sheriff of a small town, and my cousin or my fishing buddy did this lynching, and I may have even been involved. Nobody's going to be convicted. So literally, in over 99% of the lynchings that took place, of over almost 5,000 lynchings that took place from the late 18 to early 1900s, nobody was convicted. Nobody. And that goes actually through the 50s, including Emmett Till's lynchers were not convicted. And so again, if you have federal resources and you know that you may suffer a consequence equaling jail time, then you may not lynch somebody. But hey, if you do something you know you're going to get away with it, why not? So again, that was what Ida wanted to do. And I met a guy, James Cameron, who's not the movie director, but namesake to the movie director. He was all but lynched. He was known as America's oldest known lynching victim, but technically to be lynched, you have to die, be murdered. But he was with 2 other people, not at the time that they did the crime, but at the time that they got caught. And so the first person was taken from his jail cell, beaten, tortured, lynched. Second person, same thing. James taken from his jail cell, beaten, tortured, and allegedly had the noose around his neck. And there was one person in the crowd who was vehement, vocal, and courageous enough to say, stop, stop, let this man go. And so they didn't let him go, but they, took the noose from around his neck, sent him back to jail. He served some more time. Lived to be 80 plus years old, or lived almost another 80 years. So I met him in 2005, 75 years later, and was able to start the Holocaust Museum and do some other incredible things. What that gave me the inspiration for was knowing that one person can make a difference. Is that this one person literally saved his life. In that by standing up, and I do another keynote and workshop series called Stand for Justice, which talks about the ability for, one person to stand up. And while we don't see lynchings anymore, we still see a number of injustices. And whether that injustice is sexism, racism, ageism, bullying, dozens of things, to, have sit in a small group and tell somebody, hey, look, if you see this happening, please stand up against it. And I've had people say, hey, look, I'm a pit bull owner, don't assume that I'm a dog fighter. Or for college students, hey, don't judge me for my major. Or for high school students, don't judge me because of the way that I dress, or the people I hang around with, the cliques that go around. And if we have the courage to stand up to people and squash some of those isms, life would be much better. And I'm going to talk about that more in a moment, as you have the name change of your school. It's actually a school change, which I'm excited about that. So in concluding about Ida, some other things that she did, was founding member of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Pretty much quickly decided, again, Ida was uncompromising, which has its pros and cons. So she felt that they were not vocal or vehement enough about ending lynching. And so she was like, nah, I'm going to do something different. So, but she was still one of the founding members. One of the other things she did was during the First World War, late 18 teens, the government had a controversial event where a lot of Black soldiers were killed. And Ida stood up and passed out buttons speaking out against the government. And allegedly a person came into not her shop, but the shop where she was doing it, and was like, wait, I see this button, like, you can't pass these out. And she's like, why not? She's like, that's speaking out against the government. You can get in trouble. And she's like, well, something happens, but I'm passing it out. The government deserves to be spoken out against. So a few hours later, two men clearly of some type of, police authority came into the shop and were like, hey, we heard that you're passing out buttons that speak out against the government. She's like, yes, I am. Would you like one? And they're like, no, like, you can't do that. That can be considered treason. And she's like, so? She's like, look, you can go to jail for treason. And she was like, well, if I have to go to jail, I'll go to jail. And they're like, look, we don't understand. Why would you go to jail? Then, you've got a million other Negroes who aren't willing to do this. Why would you be willing to? She's like, look, I would consider it an honor to serve whatever time necessary for speaking out against the government for the dastardly deed that it's done, than be amongst the other 999,999 other Negroes because they're too scared. Both of the men left, and she was never charged with anything, never arrested. So her courage to stand up for what she believed in is unparalleled. Again, she had death threats against her, allegedly carried guns because of the death threats. And didn't return to the South because the threat was real. If she returned to Memphis, they caught her, they would have killed her. She did ultimately return to the South. There was an incident in the late 19 teens. There are a lot of race riots happening across the country for a few reasons. One is that Black people who joined the army become soldiers and gone over to Europe and were treated much differently than they were here in America, treated with respect, treated as normal human beings, not second-class citizens or worse. And so coming back to America, that was an issue where, people could take up firearms. So longer story on that, but there were also race riots because of a lot of plantation owners were selling their crops and getting more money than Black people selling their crops. And so there were some race riots that happened, and one of them was in the South, and there were 12 men who ended up being jailed as, defending themselves. And Ida visited them, and they were, saying prayers like, hey, I hope I have a peaceful death. I hope my family's okay after I die. Just hopefully, Miss Ida, you can make this happen, and tell my family I love them. And she was like, look, why don't you pray to live? Pray to survive, pray to get out of this, pray to go back to your families. And so she led them in prayer, and she wrote letter both to the governor and to the president, and the men were ultimately released. So she saved 12 men from death row from being killed. And so her courage to do that, risking her own life, again, absolutely incredible. And she lived here in Chicago, tried politics. For our political system is designed for compromise. Ida was uncompromising, so she was not going to do well at politics. So that was a challenge. She ultimately recorded a lot of what she did. I think she had the intuition and wherewithal to say she was doing some phenomenal things, and recorded her. She had a journal, and her daughter, my grandmother Alfreda, is the one who took her journal and made it into, edited and made it into a book. And I had a tough time getting published. I went to a number of publishing companies, and people didn't want to publish it at the time. Again, things have changed now where it's like you can self-publish. I've self-published a book, but back then you really couldn't self-publish. You needed a publisher to make that happen. So one side note for an insight about the family and the way I came to be is, again, Ida B. Wells had 4 children, one of them being Herman Colsat Barnett. Herman went to University of Illinois, where I went as well, was one of the founding members of Alpha Phi Alpha. And there was another guy by the name of Ben Duster, who was one of the founding members of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And they got along. Ben was from Indiana. Herman brought Ben back home to work with his father, Ferdinand, at the law firm. And Ben took a liking to Herman's younger sister, Alfreda, which allegedly didn't go well. If y'all know, guys really don't like their friends talking to their younger sister. So didn't go well, but fortunately Ben had the fortitude to say, no, I like her, I'm going to marry her. So they got married and had their 5 children, and that's why I'm here today. So I like telling that little story as well. So before I open it up to questions and answers, there's a few other things I wanted to say as far as the inspiration that I get from you naming your high school Ida B. Wells, is that it's not just the renaming of a building, it's a new school. It's a new start. You get to do whatever you want with that. This is literally history for you. You can become one of the best schools in Portland, one of the best schools in the nation by doing certain things. And I'd encourage you to, so in conclusion for the Ida B. Wells speech, I say that it's leading Wells, which is be wise with your choices. So number one is create choices. You can always do different things. Ida had choices as far as, hey, do I keep fighting the conductor, or do I make this a bigger thing and try and sue the railroad? I'm going to sue the railroad. So be wise with your choices. Make it bigger than you. Don't go for the petty things. Go for something that's going to change the circumstance for everybody. Be excellent with your actions. What you do, you're going to do anyway. You may as well do the best at it, right? Ida was excellent at everything that she did, starting from when she was a young person. And, reading and writing and being excellent at that allowed her to become a teacher, that allowed her to become a journalist. And one of the most prolific journalists of our time, of the civil rights movement. And I've got a poem that I designed years ago about doing my best, which is, life's getting me down. I'm not going to drown. I'm doing my best. God has given me a test. When the task seems too tough, I'm not going to slough. I'm doing my best. My work is my crest. Now I'm chasing my goal. Let the obstacles roll. I'm doing my best. I ain't taking no mess. And if things come with ease and it's just me to please, I'll still do my best. Why settle for less? At the end of the day, I'm proud to say I've done my best. I have earned my rest. So that's all about excellence. So excellence isn't being the best. It's about doing your best. If you do your best, you're always going to live in excellence. The third one is live with integrity. And integrity I define as, hey, knowing what's right and doing what's right, even if you don't feel like it, and even if nobody's looking. And Ida was the epitome of integrity. She was uncompromising. She wasn't going to do anything that compromised her values. For one of her, she went to Europe twice. For another trip, she went to Europe. Pretty much a woman offered her money if Ida would denigrate or distance herself from another woman. And Ida was like, no, she's cool people. She's an upstanding woman. No, the other one was like, okay, well, I'm not giving you money. I was like, all right, keep your money. I'm keeping my integrity, and found other resources to fund her trip, which, the entrepreneurial side of her was able to negotiate with the newspaper to get funding to do that. But she kept her integrity. The other part of that still relates to doing your best, which is giving your best and giving your best in order to get the best. Life is an equation. If you want to get 100% or the best out of life, you have to give 100% into what you're doing. If you do a half-ass job or give half-ass doing things, then don't expect outstanding results. Expect half-ass results. So do your best and live with integrity. The other part is lead with courage. Lead with courage. And so, and to me, to ultimately have true integrity, you have to have courage, because there's going to be things that you don't like, or people that you don't like, or circumstances that make you feel scared, that make you say, nah, I'm not sure if I'm going to do this. I'm not sure how people are going to react. Ida consistently was like, I don't care about the consequences. If I know what my values are, I'm sticking to them. I'm going to have the courage to do that. And so courage goes hand in hand with integrity. And lastly is speak with passion, which means you got to live with passion. Be passionate about what you do. Be passionate about your goals. Be passionate about helping others. And when you live with passion, you'll speak with passion. You'll have an impact with people. All of our great leaders have been able to speak with passion. So I encourage you to do all of those things, and that will make a huge impact as you have your own new school that you're doing. So again, be wise with your actions, be wise with your choices, be excellent with your actions, live with integrity, lead with courage, and speak with passion. And the other thing that I noticed, and I had to have a friend help me, so as I welcome you into my home here, you've seen the picture of Ida B. Wells. One of your slogans is lifting as we climb, which I've got a poster that I had from 30 years ago. Excuse me. That says struggles and victories. It's from the African American History Month from the College of New York in 1991. So 30 years ago, this was one of my favorite posters. And hopefully you can see it says lifting as we climb. And unfortunately, it's really tough for me to move because I'm hurting here. But I wanted to share that with you. That gives me still even more inspiration about what you're doing with your school. And then one of my favorite pieces of art is, and hopefully you can see that. Brother, helping another brother over a wall, which is, once you get over a wall, make sure you reach back and help somebody else. The same thing that you're talking about, lifting as we climb. It's not just about you. It's got to be about you and your brother or your sister. And white, black, Asian, doesn't matter. Everybody's your brother or your sister. So I hobble back over. So I encourage you to, man, take what Ida B. Wells did. Take your slogan, the new mascot, the Guardians. You are set up for super success. I'm so excited about the opportunity that you have in front of you. Again, you see my commitment. I'm in pain as I speak, but trying to change this day was going to be too difficult. And I'm like, hey, look, I'll grimace a little bit, but I'm going to do it. And so, again, I'm honored, delighted, excited, and inspired to be here. Thank you for your inspiration. I want to be, Principal Herstick has been outstanding. This is not going to be a one and done deal. I want to do whatever I can to help the school. And as hopefully I motivate you, know that you completely inspire me. And so I'm complete and open for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duster, for being here tonight, and particularly since you just had surgery a couple days ago. We're just so inspired and impressed with your presence here, given what you've had to endure the last couple days. So, audience, there is a Q&A function in Zoom, and if you are logged into the Zoom webinar, please submit a question. We have a community organizer and volunteer who's forwarding me the questions. I'll be looking at another screen to ask Mr. Duster some questions that are coming from you this evening. So, Mr. Duster, thank you so much for sharing Ida's story and your inspiring words. Could you speak a bit about what Ida's parents, siblings, and her young family life was like? Provide context for her incredible courage, passion, and determination that could have been squelched given the sexism and racism at the time. A little bit more about her youth, if you have something to share about that.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, her father was very active in the community and politics, and her mother was as well. So, and again, they had the fortitude, because most Black people, or Negroes as they were called at the time, didn't take the time to go to school because there was no direct benefit, which again goes to the educational system today. Is you've got to have a direct benefit to being educated in order for you to want to go to school. And so, I appreciate Jim Wells is his name. His insight and wisdom to say, hey, look, education is important and we're going to make it happen. And being involved in the community is not only just education for his family, but he's like, he'd have Ida read to the rest of the community. And so her siblings knew how to read and write, but everybody has different talents and different desires. So as far as I know, she was the only one that participated with the community to that degree. Her mom, again, was a cook and did a lot of things there. But again, her mom's experience, having her family been sold off into slavery, she was passionate and adamant about the family unit staying together. And so that really influenced, so that has influenced the descendants of Ida, which I'm going to be writing a book about the values that Ida had that have been passed down to the generations and have subsequently influenced me.
Thank you. And by the way, everybody, I'm Aisha Conning. I'm one of the vice principals at Ida B. Wells High School. What do you think Mr. Duster, Ida B. Wells would say about a high school in Portland, Oregon being named after her, given the fact that there's a very intense history of Oregon Black exclusion laws and history of white supremacy in our state? What would Ida B. Wells say about the name of our high school here in the Southwest Hills of Portland High School being named after her?
Yeah, so that's a tough question to answer, in that Ida didn't care about accolades. She cared about equality. And so at that question with the street renaming and some other things, it's like, our family's happy that it happened, and it represents, as Frederick Douglass, it represents progress. Ida's like, I don't care about progress. Unless we're equal, we still got work to do. So, hey, happy that it's named after me, but until we have equality, that's when we celebrate. And so that would be her stance, is, that's fine. But if this represents that we have equality, I'm happy about it. But just a name, no. So again, to me, that's still the opportunity that the school represents, is to be the most phenomenal school possible and achieve those dreams that are possible.
Thank you for that. This is another historical contextual question. Ida B. Wells, our new namesake, replaced Woodrow Wilson. And I'm wondering if you might be able to share more about her interactions with Woodrow Wilson. The renaming committee, which Principal Reach mentioned in the introduction, was really excited in a way to find out that she was a contemporary of Woodrow Wilson and that she stood up against some of the things that he stood for. So I'm not sure if you have more information or story around her interactions with Woodrow Wilson, but a couple of our attendees would be curious to hear if you do.
Right. So I don't know. Just like with President McKinley, I know that they met. I know with Woodrow Wilson, I don't believe that they met. Woodrow Wilson was known as being a racist. And I know she stood up against that. But to my knowledge, she didn't have any direct communication with President Wilson.
Hey, I want to look at a couple more. There's quite a few questions coming in from Ms. Pruitt here. Let's see here. All right. Wondering, Mr. Duster, if you have any specific advice for us as we work to make a truly inclusive culture at our school.
Absolutely. So a little bit more about my background. I've done motivational speaking and coaching the past 20 years and gotten certifications in facilitation, strategic planning, conflict resolution, restorative justice. So when you ask that, so many things pop into my mind, like, yeah, there's a ton of stuff that you can do. The foundation of it, sincerely, is adhering to the B. Wells components of it. The other thing is again, I was so inspired to say lifting as we climb, which intuitively means it's not just about me, it's about helping others. And so some schools have no one sits alone at lunch, which means, there's no isolation there. So high school is one of the most difficult environments that you'll ever experience. Is that the cliques there and the teasing, the bullying that often happens is man, it can be overwhelming. I'm encouraged by, inspired by, is your opportunity to create a culture where that doesn't happen. Is to stand up and if you see the bullying, say, hey, look, that's not cool. And again, you don't need to put yourself in harm's way, but if you see that happening, walk away. Or, that's your friend. Again, just like right now in America, it's not good enough just to be saying, I'm not racist. We've got to be anti-racist. We've got to stand up and be vocal and like, no, you can't do that. And so same thing in the schools where you can't just say, well, I'm not a bully, so that's good enough. You've got to stand up against bullying. You've got to stand up against teasing. And what I say, again, going back to the lynching scenario, is there are no innocent bystanders. It's guilty bystanders. Why does the home field? Why does the home team have home field advantage? Because of the energy of the crowd. So if you're standing around, well, I didn't tell the joke, you laughed, right? I didn't bully, but hey, you instigated. So if you're contributing to those negative behaviors, you're part of the problem. So consistently and purposefully be part of the solution. And if you're having problems, seek help. And again, that's literally and figuratively. So mental health is one of the biggest challenges, especially it continues to be a problem for the younger generations. And so seek help, seek counseling, go to your parents, seek a counselor. If you're in immediate danger, of course, seek help in that regard. But wherever you have problems, please seek help. That is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Mr. Duster, what do you think is the most common myth or misinformation about Ida B. Wells that you feel is important to correct?
So my laugh there is that she gets confused with people confuse her and like, oh, Harriet Tubman, she was the Underground Railroad person, or she did the hair care products, which is Madam C.J. Walker. So just better name recognition, period. I mean, that's I think the biggest challenge is, again, the street, she's probably got the most name recognition outside of Memphis or Holly Springs here in Chicago, because there was a large housing development that was named after her. And she's got name recognition, but they still don't know what she did. And so that's the importance of teaching both women, as we discussed, teaching both women's history and Black history, is that's American history. And American history through the ages has been written by and consequently dominated by white males. And again, I'm not necessarily mad because that's natural. If you're a white male, then you're going to write about yourself. And if you're writing your own history, if there's something bad in your history, it's like, I'm either going to leave that out or minimize it. And so, again, that's the necessity of the US, of America, to be more transparent about things that have happened in the past so we can have open dialogue and say, yeah, that was messed up back then, but here's where we are right now. And again, be optimistic about where we can go from here.
Thank you. We have time, audience, for a question or two more. We have the great honor of having Dan Duster with us until 7 p.m. So please share a question or two. And while we receive a couple more questions, I want to share with you, Mr. Duster, some really thoughtful comments that are coming through. Here's one. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, especially in your injured state. I'm really looking forward to this transformation for our school, and I'm so inspired by your words and your help. I had a text from a colleague towards the end of your talk tonight too that said he was in tears. He was so moved by Ida B. Wells' story and her courage and her bravery. Another comment that's coming through, Mr. Duster, thank you so much for sharing your family history and the importance of Ida B. Wells' story. This was so interesting and informative and really personalizes how brave, smart, and inspirational your great-grandmother was.
Yeah, thank you.
One more question coming in, a really good one. Oh, I'm excited about this one. What role do you feel teachers have in developing racial consciousness? Big question.
Right, great question. And again, to contextualize where I come from, I've done a life readiness program on and off since '92. And it evolved from a job readiness program where we talked about, resume writing and interviewing skills and so forth. And I said, no, we need to talk about goal setting, self-esteem, respect, communication. And this was originally for high school sophomores. And oftentimes it was the first time that they were having a conversation about things like goal setting. So I was brainwashed as a child. From kindergarten, it's like, hey, what are you going to do after college? So I knew I was going, there was no pressure. I knew I was going to college. I knew this, that, and the other. And so there needs to be a combination. So teachers have a responsibility and families have a responsibility. I think the challenge is at this point, if families aren't doing it, how do you do it in such a way that you can inform the students and potentially have dialogue at home, which again, the school system can't control the home front. But to have the dialogue from the teachers, from the school system, to talk about it. And part of that is putting it in the curriculum, is that a lot of school systems are scared, either scared or uninterested in talking about it because they don't care about it or they don't think it's a big issue. And the challenge with that is an example of not thinking it's a big issue is harmful. We worked for a company in the 90s and there was a guy from a southern, I don't want to say the company or the state because it's not about that. It was a guy from a southern state was like, hey, hey, Dan, you couldn't work in my territory. And there was a white woman from the Northeast who was like, what are you talking about? And we're like, yeah, racism. And she's like, that doesn't happen anymore. That is, and it's like, no, it doesn't. We weren't having a heated conversation. It was a casual dialogue, but not having the dialogue when people are uninformed, and again, ignorant meaning uninformed about what's happening with racism in our society is dangerous. So the role that teachers have and the school system have, so it's not just the teacher, it's the school system to have curriculum to talk about and work on racism. Is that there needs to be purposeful activities, research, and dialogue and interaction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Duster. And I have to say, for me personally, it's such an honor to share this time with you and in this space, even though it's over a screen. We hope someday you might actually be able to come visit us. I'm going to turn things over to Principal Reestich to close and offer a few comments. And thank you again, Mr. Duster.
Mr. O'Connor, thank you. I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Ms. Conning. Dan, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this and I can't believe, here we are. So it's a dream come true. I know we've talked about it for weeks, if not months. I just love this idea of Ida B. Wells always thinking beyond herself and not wasting her time fighting with a person, but investing time and energy in fighting the system or changing the big picture. So really, thank you for that. Thank you for pushing us to be wise with our choices, excellent with our actions, to live with integrity, to lead with courage and speak with passion. That really resonates with me. As you know, we chose the Guardians as our mascot, and the spirit of what you describe, how Ida protected her siblings and how she protected came to aid of those who were harmed and mistreated, led with courage. That's what we're aspiring to do, to take care of one another, to take care of our community, to take care of our neighbors, to take care of our classmates, our teammates, and to do that beyond both today and beyond. And then I really appreciate you letting us know that Ida would probably not be too impressed that we named a building after her, but would want to know what we're doing to really create equity and equality, to make sure that all of our students are given what they need to be successful, both today and tomorrow, and that she would hold us accountable for that. And that's a source of inspiration for me and many of us. So I really appreciate you giving voice to that. And then the last thing I want to say, lifting as we climb. We didn't come up with that. Ida B. Wells, as you mentioned, she helped found NAACP, also the first national the National Association of Colored Women. And that was their motto, at least for a period of time. So when we saw that, we thought that's a wonderful way to continue her legacy and honor her as well. So I'm glad that resonates with you too.
Yeah. Like I said, I had a friend come over and help me because the pictures were in the basement and I couldn't bring up on my own. So
oh my goodness,
I was just like, I got to share it with you because that is important to me and has been important to me for quite a long time. So I'm humbled, inspired, and appreciative of what you've done there. Thank you.
We feel really grateful, and thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for sharing. We'll look forward to more conversations, and just bottom of our hearts, thank you for being with us tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I'll be out there for sure. So in a couple of weeks, I'll be able to walk, but either fall or spring semester, Ms. Conley and the rest of the support staff, I'm absolutely coming out there. So I look forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good night. And thank you everybody for
everybody.
joining us.